G'day friends and foes, Arjay here with Arjay's This Is Not Legal Advice, or TINLA for short, and nor is it legal advice, everything's opinion only, blah blah blah. So I'm here at Corowa / Pratton Park. So technically it turns out this part is Pratton Park, and just a couple of meters this other way is Corowa Park, and you've got Corowa Surf Lifesaving Club just here. But why that's important is that I'll say in a second. So I'm in Pratton Park now, and now I'm in Corowa Park. So the reason why that's important, it relates to today's court decision. So I hope it's not too loud with the wind here either, is it? Don't mind me being in a suit at the beach, I just came from court. So anyway, I was proposing to have a mass rally, protest, whatever you want to call it, same thing, political rally in the park here. So it's basically just one giant park, and even TripAdvisor calls it Corowa Pratton Park, so it combines the two names. And apparently like another little section of it's called Lorraine something Park, and then you've got various other names, but it's essentially one giant park. Hi Ruby. Yeah, it's quite sunny and whatever, no clouds in the sky. But anyway, so I'll quickly explain the difference between negative rights and positive rights. Again, I hope it's not too windy here. Can you let me know, Ruby, if it's too windy, if it's like buggering up the sound? Just fix my tyre. Anyway, so I'll assume that it's not too windy then. And anyway, so in Australia and the UK based countries, so the common law countries, we have the concept of negative rights, even though it's a stupid name for it. But basically you have the right to do anything you like, so long as it does not harm others, for one, but for two, as long as it's not banned by law. So some other places have positive rights where they'll have allegedly like a big book, big code or whatever that says, hey look, you can do this, you can do that, blah blah blah. But for the British based countries or nations or self-governing colonies, whichever way you want to call it, we have negative rights where, as I said, you can do what you like so long as it's not banned. So your rights are not dependent on statute. As another way of looking at it. Anyway, so I went to court today. I did put in a Peaceful Assembly Act notice notice of intention to hold a peaceful assembly, and it was for I put on the form Pratton or Corowa Park, because it depends which map you even look at as to which section's which. But I just found on Gold Coast City Council's website that officially, I'll just turn this camera around for a second, officially just past that footpath is Pratton Park, and on this side of it is Corowa Park. So anyway, why that's important is the magistrate, and it's the same magistrate that I had on the 29th of May, but things were a little bit different this time around. And anyway, he claimed that there was an issue again with the forms, this time a different claimed issue. He accepted this time that one-word answers are in fact answers, because I had one-word answers on there, such as how shall you be contacted, phone, who shall we contact, me, but obviously my name's already stated elsewhere on the form multiple times. Whereas in the previous case, back in May, he claimed that unknown for two answers were not answers, that therefore there was a threshold issue that the form wasn't filled in properly, which really means the police application should be dismissed. But that was one issue. Number two was he claimed that where the form says day, I'll go back to the park thing. So he claimed that on the form where it says place, that putting the two parks that are literally next to each other officially, but apparently colloquially referred to as combining the names of the parks, i.e. Kawara Pratton Park, that's two separate locations, and therefore the police are too confused and the council too confused as to how to allocate resources, that kind of thing, which is just ridiculous. A part of that is the Section 32C of the Acts Interpretation Act in Queensland, which states that the singular shall mean the plural and vice versa. So basically, if you say places or place, it means you can insert one place or multiple places, even though essentially it's a one place anyway. So that was one issue. Number two was I had multiple dates for the same rally. And again, Section 32C of the Acts Interpretation Act, stating that plural shall mean singular and vice versa, means that I should be able to put multiple dates for the one protest. And that was confirmed in a case called Oakey Creek. And in that case, there was basically picketing or protesting, political rally, it's all the same thing, they're all synonyms, they mean the same thing. Which the judge doesn't agree that they do mean the same thing, but they do really. So in that case there was like picketing or workplace protest, whatever way you want to call it, for a prolonged period, and the magistrate, that was a Court of Appeal Justice, so the Court of Appeal refers to the Supreme Court's Court of Appeal. They said, hey look, one side saying, hey look, they've got multiple dates so it doesn't count, but that's just stupid. This is very paraphrased, of course. So therefore, day shall mean days and vice versa. And my eyebrows going everywhere in the wind. And that should have been fine too, but the magistrate didn't accept that. Another issue they had was they claimed that because I wrote on the official notification page words to the effect of political... what did I write exactly? I've got it here so I can just check it. Sorry about taking a little minute. Got a big bag of papers. Anyway, so basically I put protesting the COVID directions, a couple of other things, words to that effect. And then in emails between myself and the acting senior sergeant, who's the officer in charge of Broadbeach Police Station, I mentioned that, preventing me from doing such a political rally / protest is unlawful interference with my right to political liberty, which it is. And then the judge tried claiming that therefore I'm lying about the purpose. Again, this is very paraphrased. I have to wait for the transcripts anyway. But basically claimed that I was misleading or whatever about the purpose of the protest, and claimed that a protest isn't a political rally, which again is stupid. And then hi Jane and Sharon, I'll just read Jane's question, if it is a question. Hi Arjay, how can we get our country back, considering it was sold off long ago, or a long time ago? Isn't what happened a crime against mankind of this land? Yeah, so really, people should own what they are supposed to own, public assets. It shouldn't be just flogged off, and obviously the ones that are attractive for private purchases are the ones that are productive. So therefore, if the government's flogging off all the productive stuff and keeping all the cruddy stuff, then that just means we get in, debt trap again, because we have to have all these non-performing assets that are costing us money, and we have no income from the assets that do actually produce. It's sort of like with coal mines or, iron ore mines or whatever. You'll have a mine approved and the government's like, oh wow, we're going to make $4 billion over the next 40 years. Yet obviously if the government's going to make $4 billion in royalties, then the company that owns it is going to make, $400 billion or whatever, or more, just as an example. And anyway, so it's actually really good with the court today and the opposition by the police, in that, one, the magistrate actually allowed me to speak for once, unlike what they did back in May, but the magistrate still was smirking every time I looked down. I could, maybe not every single time, but you look down 50 times to read things and you see him smirking when I'm looking down. So again, I don't think that's very appropriate. Some poor lady just fell off a scooter, but she's got people there to help her. Ouch. Anyway, then two, the police actually had the legally required mediation this time, and it was an independent mediator. We got, I can't disclose what was discussed in the mediation exactly, but obviously it was concerning, negotiating about terms or conditions of the protest, and obviously that was not fully successful, because then it went to court. But back in May, the same magistrate accepted the word of the officer who sued me in her private capacity. Hey, I'm just doing a live video. How'd you go? Sort of, like a lot. I can't have the authorised protest.
Don't mention my name on it.
Yeah, who are you? I don't even know who you are, just walking past. Anyway, so then, where was I up to? So obviously there was a mediation, and that was unsuccessful, as in not completely agreeing with everything. And again, I can't mention those particular details, and that's fine. But it was all peaceful and respectful. It was as a mediation supposed to be, but that didn't happen back in May. So then, that actually helps with the actual Supreme Court case that I have. And then, what else? Another thing is I actually did it in the name of Commissioner of Police. I'm trying to show two fingers there or whatever, or finger and a thumb. So again, this time it was actually done properly, not the officer personally suing me. And that's actually really good for the Supreme Court case again. And then I guess the third thing is that the magistrate accepted one-word answers this time around. And what was the other contention? And anyway, basically, I saw a reporter there before I went into the hearing, and then she, just had a quick chat. And then I said, like, she maybe asked what it was about exactly or something like that. And then I pointed out that, the magistrate could well make a decision or declaration, or whichever way you want to do it, that COVID directions are inoperative or invalid in Queensland. And they could have done that. The magistrate chose not to. In his deliberations, he specifically said, hey, look, this is very paraphrased again, I'm not trying to verbal anyone or anything like that, but it went like, hey, look, you've got issues with your application, in terms of, you know, the day versus days, that the location supposedly different, even though it's literally like, you know, how big's that road? Like 4 meters difference between the two parks, which colloquially known apparently as the one park, and it appears to be the one park anyway. And then yeah, anyway, does anyone have any questions? And I'll just look at the comments quickly. So Sharon says to take my time, and that she's learned that we don't have a government. So what do you mean exactly by that? Because that's interesting, because there's different, you know, interpretations of that. Hi Rusty as well. And I can't see the link, like I can see m.youtube.com blah blah blah, but I can't see what the link's to. So presumably that's answering about why we don't have a government, apparently. But, you know, I think it's really disappointing that the magistrate didn't take the opportunity to, you know, make a decision if the COVID directions are valid or not. And at least I got to make submissions that, you know, section 47, 49 of the Statutory Instruments Act, blah, 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 COVID directions are not even law in Queensland. Also, you know, another interesting concept is if that same magistrate gets someone with a COVID fine, then, and if they know or have reason to believe that the COVID directions aren't the law because of what I said today, then what's going to happen there? Is the magistrate going to say, hey, look, you know, in a previous case I got told the COVID directions are not law because of X, Y, Z, and therefore, you know, you're free to go without getting a fine, or not? Do I have to get a fine to be able to challenge the jurisdiction or whatever of COVID directions? And my protest was opposed solely on the grounds of COVID directions. So there were 3 points. One was about the number of people, one was about the time, and one was about the day of having the peaceful assembly, because I have markets here every second Sunday, and even though the location was going to be in the top northwestern side of Kurrawa Park, then, and the markets aren't there but they're next to that, then again, you know, it was about mass gathering numbers. So just looking at some comments. Hi Darren. So they already have full-term abortion in Queensland up until, you know, the kids popped out of the lady bits entirely or via cesarean. So, and they have so-called safeguards of that, being that after, 3 months, this is very, very paraphrased, you know, I haven't looked at it for a long time, but after about 3 months, if the mother wants to have an abortion, then they just need to consult 2 doctors that, you know, it's not really about medical reasons. I have studied medical law at university, at Bond University, as many of you know, but basically, you know, if the mother just says they want to abort the kid, then that's deemed a medical reason, which is ridiculous. And whatever happened to adoption for unwanted children instead of killing a child? But literally, you know, the kid can have its head sticking out of the mother and then get its head chopped open and its brain sucked out, as an example of how they do it. So, what else? Hi Paul as well. Something about Japanese people didn't take over Gold Coast, I think. Robin says we own nothing. You know, that's pretty much right anyway, even though it's not supposed to be like that. Nan Sharon said the link she put up shows everything. Again, I can't see the link yet. And then Ruby's saying about the negative thing. So with rights, there's two general concepts. One is of positive rights and one is negative rights. So in positive rights systems, they basically have it that humans have no rights unless the government says you have some rights. If you get some laws saying, hey look, you have the right to peaceful public assembly, then you don't have a right to it. But in Australia, New Zealand, the UK, Canada, and a lot of the other British-based economies and systems, then you have negative rights. So that means that if you are prohibited from doing something, and assuming that prohibition is actually lawful, then you can't do it, but you can do anything besides that. So just say, as an example, I don't really want to give that example, but just say, if some young lady wants to marry 4 different blokes, then she has the right to do that unless it's prohibited by law. So within the Marriage Act, it basically says that and there's also various state, criminal codes and Crimes Act and whatever against bigamy or polygamy. But if the law didn't say that, then you could marry whoever the hell you wanted. And even with that, a lot of people don't realise that within the Marriage Act, people can have, let's just say, plural marriages, so long as they were married, say, in an overseas jurisdiction that allows it. So, you might have someone go to Australia from the Middle East and they have 4 lawful wives and then unlimited wives on the side. I forget what they call it exactly, but it's basically you can have 4 official wives at the same time, but then you can have temporary wives as many as you want. So if they are married to 2 women or 5 women, or maybe not 5 but 4 women, and they move to Australia, then technically they can have 4 wives. So, and that's under our law, which is, perhaps someone might think that is political correctness gone mental. Nan Jane's saying about why hasn't ScoMo spoken about the Belton Road Initiative in Victoria. So as far as I know, they have put some information out that they were looking at reviewing all of these, agreements between, say, states and foreign entities. So as far as I know, they are supposed to be reviewing that. And they might well have, I don't remember exactly, but it might be something like, hey, look, we're going to tear these things up unless you provide or show cause why it shouldn't be torn up within a certain date or time period. Hi, Barbara. I like the little cartoon character. And then Darren's saying about in New Zealand you have Jacinda Ardern also with full-term abortions. Did I answer your question, Ruby, about the negative rights versus positive rights? Sharon says Palaszczuk's got it on a campaign bus. So they actually passed a law, when was it? Maybe 2 years ago or 1 year ago in Queensland for full-term abortions. And again, it supposedly has a protection of 2 doctors signing off on it, but it's deemed a, medical necessity if the woman just doesn't want the baby, because she's like, no, if I have this baby, I'm going to feel bad about it. And then they're like, oh, okay, we'll sign that off. Which, of course, we do have little infants also being used in certain products. Like vaccine manufacturing and medical testing and drug development, that kind of thing as well. And you have these cell lines. A lot of people have heard about the HK169, which is incorrectly identified by many people as being an ingredient in things like Pepsi. So basically what they do, they use those cells to make an artificial tongue, essentially, and i.e. it can sense, salty, sweet, bitter, and salt, sweet. Can't even think what the fourth sense of the tongue is sour. But anyway, so they'll make like a little cell line or whatever. So imagine like an artificial tongue, doesn't have to look like a tongue, and it will have electrodes on it, and they measure the response when they put certain products, i.e., soft drink as an example, and they measure the electrical, I should say, response, and then they might say reduce the sugar by 1%, and then test again, does it have the same response? Is it too dissimilar? If it is dissimilar, hey, if we stick some stevia in it, how much stevia do we need to replace the sugar? Because, people have this push for low sugar, low sodium diet, so they don't actually stick, the aborted babies in the soft drink. They use it when they're developing flavours, and, if they can remove, I'm just making an example, if they can remove 5% of the sugar and get an extra star or half a star and a star rating, and still get a similar response because they're replacing it, say, with stevia. Stevia may or may not be cheaper than sugar. I imagine it's probably actually more expensive, but, that's why they do that. So Darren says, men and women have flesh and blood and have inalienable rights. Citizens have privileges that the government loves to take off you. Yeah, so that's one way of looking at it. Technically, we're all supposed to be British subjects. And again, with the positive rights versus negative rights, another way of looking at it using that terminology is that we have inalienable rights with negative rights. And if they are to be taken away, even though you aren't supposed to take them away, that's why they're inalienable, i.e. unable to be taken away, then the government actually has to say that specifically and say, hey, look, it's like some of the arguments I used today, even though the judge didn't want to hear those arguments, he just wanted to hear about how the form was filled out, even though, it involves statutory interpretation. But basically, if you are going to prohibit, say, gatherings of 30 people or more in Queensland, as an example, then if it applies to things like protests, then it should specifically state that. So it should say, this also applies to peaceful assembly. So peaceful assembly, protests, political rally, it's all really the same thing. Again, the judge, being a magistrate, didn't agree with it. So Sharon's talking about, she says, we are sovereign living persons of the land at birth. They legally killed us at birth and traded us on a stock market to make money. Yeah, so a lot of that stuff is actually incorrect. Most of it is based on the works of a guy called David Wynn Miller in the USA, and he was a welder or a boilermaker and made up a whole bunch of law that involves the Sesquiquivir Trust of 1666. What that act is really about is you had the bubonic plague in London and the UK, and two, that was stopped when supposedly there was a flour mill and flour got blown into the air and then blew up, which is explosive when it, aerosolizes, if you want to call it that. And then there was the Great Fire of London, and a lot of people were burnt to death, never found again. A lot of people drowned, say, in the Thames River, that kind of thing. So their bodies were not found. So basically, the stuff about dead at sea, blah, 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 is just say if you've got, Bill, and Bill owns a house, and Bill's got a widow, and Bill's widow hasn't seen him for 7 years, that they would create a legal fiction saying, even though we haven't found the body, then, after 7 years he's deemed dead, so therefore she could inherit the property, as an example, instead of it just being in a trust forever or sucked up by the government. And then David Wynn Miller also brought to the fore, I guess you can say, word games. So there is a lot of word games in real law as well, but things like saying your birthing certificate. So a berth is where a ship goes, and so that's why it's a birth certificate, and it's on stock paper, and stock is traded on the stock exchange, so therefore you're a commodity. When stock paper actually, or bond paper, it's also called, is actually just a specific grade of paper that it's like, thick paper and high quality, and you can get watermarks in there for security reasons, as opposed to, you're just 80 grams per square metre of photocopier paper, as an example. Another thing was that claim was that all courts operate in a maritime or admiralty jurisdiction all the time, and you have the judge, and the judge is the captain of the ship, so therefore the law doesn't apply and they can do whatever the hell they want, even though obviously a lot of magistrates and judges do whatever the hell they want, which you can look up the term judicial activism if you like. Sometimes it's used for good, sometimes not for good. But you also have claims that, in a court you have the witness in the dock. A dock is where a ship docks, also a berth, so therefore, and it goes on, but it's all word games. And David Wynne-Miller was quite popular, like on YouTube, around 2005, 2006, and he used to go around doing, legal seminars, charging people a lot of money for those, as well as providing, so in that way it's sort of like Wayne Glue, perhaps, and then also providing like a book of legal stuff, and basically they have all this weird and wonderful procedures that's all based on fake law. As many of you would have heard that, when a judge asks you for your name or asks you if you're there, you don't answer, because otherwise you're entering into a contract with them, a consensual agreement, that kind of thing. And when they come, you ask them if they're under their oath, and they'll leave the courtroom 3 times. The first time, it's in blah blah jurisdiction, maritime jurisdiction. Second time they're in the Catholic Church jurisdiction, the ecclesiastical jurisdiction. Then they'll come in a common law jurisdiction, and then they'll leave again. And then you, because they've just left because you're wasting the court's time, then you declare yourself the highest person in the courtroom and dismiss your own case, all that kind of things. And David Wynne-Miller basically claimed that he was immortal. He claimed that he had a kidney surgery or something like that when he was 20 years old. This is very paraphrased, and that normally, for that particular operation, kidney removal or whatever, that normal people would have to be in a court, or in a hospital I should say, for say 6 weeks, but he got out after half an hour, and he felt super energetic and whatever. He could jump 10 foot tall all of a sudden, and that he had not aged a single day in all that time. He said that in front of a camera at a seminar, and obviously the response was very negative to that, because a lot of people that lie about stuff or exaggerate push it too much. Karen Brewer just found herself going from speaking about real life child crimes that are documented that people have been found guilty of, then extending it more and more to something like, if anyone has ever gone to these particular private schools and they're Freemason demolays, and then any private school, then basically any high school in Australia. And then she made specific claims about a lot of people, and is it Dr. Ann Webster, or maybe just her husband's a doctor, and the husband and their charity called Zoe Support that provides help to young mothers, and they had clients apparently from about 13 years of age to about 26. So they go there for counselling, go there for free nappies, and classes how to breastfeed and stuff like that, I imagine. But she exaggerated too much, and then didn't defend herself in the court either, and then just had an award of $875,000 awarded against her, and then, you know, plus costs and whatever. But I am doubtful that the Webster family and their charity will ever see that money, but that's beside the point. The point is with David Wynn Miller, when he was basically claiming he was immortal, and people looked at him funny, and then he said, oh well, maybe I aged a day, but if you don't age, then isn't it fair to say you're claiming to be immortal? And sadly, he died. Robin wants me to call, so that's fine. Barbara also posted a link, so I can't, as I said, I can't see what the link's to. I can just see the URL, but you know, maybe it is a great link. Robin says New Zealand is owned by New South Wales, so obviously that's referring to the colony of New South Wales used to include New Zealand. New Zealand didn't actually have their own constitution until recently, and even within our own constitution, New Zealand's seen it as an originating state. So that's another interesting topic. And Sharon says that the Scott Morrison signed the Road and Belt initiative or project a year before Andrew, so I wasn't aware of that. And would it have been ScoMo himself, or would it be Berejiklian, the Premier? And Ruby says the answer I gave, negative or positive rights, is sufficient. Again, you know, I could do a whole video on it, but that's just a summary. Sharon says the doctors need to be charged. So I don't know if that's about the Webster family doctors. I assume not. They've been deemed to be, you know, innocent. Again, you know, we have innocence until proven guilty. You know, Karen could have made submissions from her hideout in New Zealand, or wherever she may well be now, and try to prove a case, and that would have been interesting. No, they obviously wouldn't just accept who's your daddy and what school did he go to as valid evidence. But, you know, she had the opportunity to provide that information and hasn't done so far. Robin's saying about someone being narcissist, inhumane, lost their morals. I'm not sure exactly who that's about. Oh, so maybe about the doctors being charged. That might be about the doctors doing the, you know, up to birth abortions, I take it. So Barbara says, yes, they take an oath to preserve life. So that's about the hypocritical, or it's not hypocritical, it's Hippocratic oath. So with that, you know, first rule of being a medical person is do no harm. But then that gets balanced, just so you're aware, that they'll say, well, the harm to the mother might be that she might try and suicide, as an example. But that's the justification they use, but they don't need to, unfortunately, you know, it doesn't have to be that the woman is suicidal, because usually it's a woman that decides if she's keeping a baby or not, as in, you know, going to kill it or not. And, you know, unfortunately, you know, bad things do happen, including, you know, the very rare case of, you know, some poor lady getting raped or whatever and killing a baby then. You know, I can understand that, you know, even though it's still killing a baby, and some people say, well, the baby's innocent, but, you know, genetically they're of some other person, and maybe there is such a thing as a rape gene or a, you know, criminality gene or whatever, or genes. So Graham Jeffs is on. He says, still pushing through with your bid to join our unlawful foreign registered corporate government and parliament. So again, Jeff doesn't know what he's talking about, and I'll put it more bluntly, Graham Jeffs, I should say. So I'll just call you Graham instead of Jeffs. But Graham falsely stated in comments on YouTube that he had contacted Reset Parliament, i.e. myself, about certain things, which he did not, so, he's a liar. And also with the foreign registered corporate government and parliament, again, claims of Australia being traded on a US stock exchange came about partly through David Wynne-Miller and partly through Scott Bartell. Scott Bartell had a somewhat famous documentary, it might be about 14 years old, 10 years old, called What the FUQ, and in that he claims that he discovered that Australia's a privately owned US company, words to that effect, and look, you can go on the Edgar database and look that up. Again, that is a misunderstanding of the law. What that database is, just like our own ASIC database, is a transparency register. So if Australia wants to sell bonds and other securities to US citizens in the USA, then we have to be transparent about it, and so do all the other countries. It's specifically listed as a foreign entity on the EDGAR database, which is electronic data gathering and resourcing or something like that. It's part of the US Securities and Exchange Commission, which is just the same as our ASIC. And as many people would appreciate, a lot of what happens in Australia happens in the USA or happens in a similar fashion. So with that, basically imagine that Graham comes up with his own country. So he calls it Aussie Patriots Roll Country. Just making a silly example on. But he then goes to US citizens and says, hey, look, if you give me $10 million, I will give you $100 million per year. And then he gets all these $10 million from people, and then he doesn't have any $100 million to give for every person every year, and he just stole the money. So that's the whole idea of the transparency register. And that comes about due to, in the UK, there are a couple of really dodgy things. There was also in Holland or the Netherlands, there was the tulip bubble. But in the UK, for instance, there was a thing called the South Sea bubble. And there was a company called the South Sea Company. And it was going to be like the Dutch East Indies Company and get a royal patent so they can go around and basically colonise parts of the world. They were going to, import a lot of gold and silver and spices and whatnot from South America. They collected all this money. The share started out at £10 a share and ended up being £1,000 a share, because as the company got more and more popular, of course, the share price rises. But in the meantime, they're collecting more and more money from people. They promised people, hey, look, you invest, £10, you'll get I don't remember the figure, but just let's say 10% return per annum. So, in 11 years, you've got your £10 back for every £10 you, give them or lend them. Plus, so you've got your money back plus an extra pound or whatever. But you have a secondary market for shares. You can and bonds and whatever. You can sell them as well. So they also did some other dodgy things where, for instance, this lifeguard tower beeped for some reason. Where they were lending people money to buy the shares because, all the people with money ran out of money, and it was a big Ponzi scheme. And then they made it accessible for, people that couldn't afford the shares by loaning them money and then charging them interest, and they had to pay that back despite the fact that the company went broke. And there was also a lot of involvement with UK politicians, from memory, including Prime Minister Walpole at the time. The people fled to Belgium from memory, and they took with them some insurance policy, which was about all the dodgy politicians that they were paying off to continue this scam. And they didn't buy or build a single ship, and they didn't have a single shipment of goods from South America. Yet they just stole all the money. And then the story goes that the people in the UK government, it might have been like the Attorney General or maybe even the Prime Minister, sent an envoy to, say, Belgium, if it was Belgium where the guy ran to, and the main guy that is, and gave them money saying, we want you to refuse to extradite the person, no matter what we say. And publicly they were saying, we've got to get our money back for our people, blah, blah, blah. And basically the government bailed out the company, and it took them something like 300 years to pay back the debt from the South Sea company bubble. So that's why you have transparency registers. So, if Australia wants to say, hey, look, every dollar you invest with us, we'll give you 20 cents back per year, something like that. Plus also at the end of 20 years, you can sell a bond for the original price. Then, we have to prove that we're not just ripping people off. And the USA was registered with our ASIC database until 2016 too. So if Australia was registered on a US stock exchange, which it's not, it's a Securities and Exchange Commission, which, also police the stock exchange, and there's several stock exchanges. Some of you may have heard of NASDAQ as an example. That's one particular stock exchange that focuses on technological goods. You also have, is the Dow Jones a separate one, or maybe that's an aggregate of a bunch of stock exchanges in the USA, but just as an example. So Sharon says about adrenochrome. So with stories related to that, I am very dubious that why would, even though, there's these little memes that come out and so-called company records saying, hey, look, there's all these people that suicided and their adrenochrome is A triple plus and B plus and whatever. But why would they go to the effort and bother of killing a bunch of people for this chemical that can be synthetically made easily? You can buy the chemical adrenochrome, which is modified adrenaline. I forget the prices. I looked it up a few years ago because I was going to do a video on it. But I don't know, it might have been $300 for a gram of it, when even with the latest round of documents from a supposed company selling it, people miscalculated $192,000 per gram, and it should have been 19,200. But a lot of people know that there's terrible things happening, but then there's some people that take advantage of that to make up, exaggerate whatever. So Robin says our government has opened shelf companies to steal all from us in Queensland. It's called Brigalow, so it's a Brigalow Corporation. It's an interesting thing. You can look up many interesting videos on that. And then it's Pekka Maru. I don't know what that is. Maybe it's a second company. 2 shelf companies, folks. Jane says Dan Andrews has destroyed Victoria. How long is this going to go on for? Imagine how long it's going to take to win in court. So there is a Liberal candidate apparently that is suing, at least for some grounds of COVID, and it's before the courts now. So be interesting to see what happens with that as well. With my own Supreme Court case, it won't be dealt with until sometime between 8th of February and the end of March. I've already sent to Crown Law, who's representing the state of Queensland, and Dr. Jeanette Young, the Chief Health Officer, and to the QPS, Queensland Police Service legal team. So I got a notice from the court saying, hey, look, you've got to work out how long and what dates you propose this case to take between these dates, and let me know within 2 weeks. So I've already sent those to QPS and Crown Law, and I'm still awaiting them to respond. Darren says about it's a matter of interpretation, really. Indeed, so a lot of law is. And also I think there was actually a response in to Jane's comment about Dan Andrews destroying Victoria. But even with court cases like today, it's a matter of interpretation. Does day mean days if it is separate dates? and not a continuous period, as an example. So Jason says, in reality, he's probably the least of our problems. Who is he taking orders from? Indeed. Robin saying, fake, no, it's maritime law. So there is such a thing as maritime law or admiralty law, but it does specifically relate to shipping, boating. And it's nothing to do with the land. It's nothing to do with, a lot of people say the Submerged Lands Act basically makes it that all of Australia is deemed underwater and therefore, maritime law applies to all. So that's not correct. Again, David Wynne Miller, I think you'll find that Wesley Snipes tried relying on David Wynne Miller tactics and got himself stuck in jail for tax evasion for 2 years. And a lot of you will know who Wesley Snipes is. He's an African-American actor. He was in Blade Runner. I think he actually owned the company that made Blade Runner or bought it after the first one. Really good actor. He's like an action man kind of dude. Ruby says, good question. So Sharon says that she's disturbed that Waterworld in Queensland, says that Wet and Wild Waterworld, advertising children and adult swimming parties. So obviously if you have children, you want your kids to be safe, so of course you would swim with your children. Naked? So I just saw the next part. So I interested in you sending me a link to those ads. I presume that it is a fake ad. Why the hell would they have naked swimming parties? There are nudist resorts that probably do, but I doubt that Wet and Wild, if it's Wet and Wild is Waterworld, I don't know, have that. So with Sharon, she says she disagrees that Karen Brewer is a liar. So, there are elements of truth to a lot of things, but they get exaggerated. And then, again, its interpretation is exaggerated being a liar. And then there are specific cases where she's claimed that, XYZ is a bad person. Let's just call it that. So I'm not saying weird words around people walking past. Disagree. Oh, okay, so Sharon may be saying that Karen Brewer is a liar, fair enough, and that she's abused people like Sharon who have been abused. Yeah, so, it's how filthy can someone be? I'm just saying as a general thing, not saying about Karen Brewer in particular, but for someone to accuse someone of such a heinous, evil, vile act if they're just making it up. That's freaking ridiculous, putting it nicely. And, unfortunately there are people that get falsely accused of things, including by strangers, so it's not even got any kind of credibility. It's not like Adrian John Wells where he claims that ScoMo and the Governor General did things to him, which I don't believe at all. He also claims on his own profile that he's a 4-year-old, that he's a secret astronaut since 1984, and has a picture of himself in a St John Ambulance uniform, where he's pretending that's his secret astronaut uniform, where he's been awarded a medal by, I think it's a Governor General from memory. And then, that's just ridiculous. I used to be in St John Ambulance. I know it's a St John Ambulance uniform. And, a problem is that then a lot of people say, oh, well, if you point that out to them, show them screenshots and send them to his actual profile, obviously he's not a 4-year-old, then people say, oh, well, that's proof that it happened to him, because, you'd have to be nuts after that. But that's not proof that something happened to someone. It's proof that they're a liar. And, it doesn't mean that, if someone's lying about one thing, they're lying about all things. But you got to question the credibility of, people that claim that they're 4-year-olds and that they're secret astronauts. So Robin says, look up Pekka Maru. So I've not heard of that before you said it earlier, and I know about the Brigalow Corporation. And yeah, so it's also, in a way, there's claims with the Brigalow Corporation that it is basically like if you go to buy shares from a stockbroker, and sometimes the stockbrokers say, okay, well, I'll just put it in my name because that way it's easier to transfer when you want to sell them. But really they're stealing your shares. So with the Brigalow Corporation, the story goes that all of Queensland basically got converted over to this company, and the boss of the company is whoever the premier is at the time, and therefore that confers ownership. So, you know, there are sometimes truth and lies mixed together as well. Obviously it takes a long time to go through things properly, but, you know, that's interesting. So Darren says about the new Victorian Omnibus Amendment, absolutely horrible. So many UN-defined terms, it's dangerous and will be abused. I'm sure it will be abused. I'm sure it is dangerous. I've not read the whole thing. I've seen some commentary on it, including about section, is it 234 or something? But I did just a quick, you know, control F to look for those numbers, whatever section it was, and I can't even find that. But basically, there's people claiming that the real part of it is not the offensive parts, because that can be just, you know, removed later, but claims to make police officers authorised health officers and backdating it. But I've not actually read through the whole thing. I've not found that purported section or changes to that section of the Health and Wellbeing Act. So Robin says, we have an illegal and unlawful government judiciary system who have stolen everything from the Australian people. So I certainly cannot comment on that, but, you know, whatever. You're entitled to your opinion. Obviously I can't say things that prejudice court cases, that kind of thing as well, if that makes sense. Nor bring the, you know, industry into disrepute, and it really is an industry, of course. Barbara says the link's about a professor in Ireland who's very credible and fighting for humanity. She tells us the truth about the virus and how to protect ourselves. Also mentions masks, how they get their stats, and is changing doctors, etc., with crimes against humanity. Yeah, so, you know, COVID stuff has so many problems, including that the tests are fake tests. It even says so on a Therapeutic Goods Administration website, as one example. And the CDC in America, and it's a TGA here, and, you know, a lot of other things as well. So Robin says Pekka Maru is equivalent, this is paraphrased, is the equivalent of the Brigalow Corporation but for New South Wales, and owns everything in New South Wales. And I don't know what the comment is about the ADF will be appointed in Queensland and Western Australia exactly. So anyway, I'll reverse the camera and go for a little walk and see if there's any more comments. I'll just... there we go. So, you know, there's lots of people who go to this park, and it's a really big area, or two parks if you want to call it that. I'll just try and show you the view quickly. You can see how many people are on the beach, or whatever. So beaches were actually, it was banned to go to the beaches back in about May or April, but then they opened things up again. If I change the camera to landscape mode, the picture will be on the side, so unfortunately I can't do that. But, you know, there's hundreds of people here, and, you know, even in Queensland, in Brisbane as an example, they had supposedly 30,000 people, which I think was really more like 3,000, based on the size of the area, or maybe even 5,000, depending on how tightly packed people were. But you had that at Brisbane for the Black Lives Matter protest, and there's no community transmission of COVID-19. You also had on the 30th of May, there was about 2,500 people, which the news claimed was hundreds of people, but some organisers falsely claimed that there were 5,000 people, which was a lie. And some people need to learn how to count on both sides, but there's no point exaggerating and just bullshitting, basically. You also had then the Black Lives Matter protest was a week later, and the news claims there were 30,000 people for that, which was really, as I said, maybe 5,000 people, which is a hell of a lot of people to turn up to something, but why lie about it? And then, when was that? On the 5th of September, there were probably about, was that the bigger one or the smaller one? So there were two protests, 5th of September, and which was World Freedom Day, or Freedom Day as people changed it from when I was advertising for World Freedom Day back in April when I was protesting. But one of the protests, either 5th of September or a couple of weeks before that, 2 or 3 weeks before that, had probably, somewhere between 800 and 1,200 people realistically, even though organisers like Tricky Tritty claims it's 5,000 to 7,000 or whatever figures he put. Again, why lie about it? You can quite easily work out density of people and how many people there are, and I'll do a video on that one day. But one of them had, like that many people, and the other one maybe had, I think the other one was smaller, maybe 500 people. I don't remember exactly which one was which. Anyway, so I'm going to go put in for another protest at this park, this time have it limited to 1 day, and call it the northwestern part of Corowa Park. Actually helped set a world record here. When was that? Last year, I think. They had the most amount of people doing sand angels at once, like snow angels but in the sand, and we stole a record from Michigan, which was over, sort of probably where the little beach volleyball courts are. I forget how many people we had here, maybe 3,000 or 2,000, something like that. You can look it up. It's quite interesting. And this is the southern part of the electorate, the state electorate of Surfers Paradise, which I'm running for in the state election. And that's another reason why I wanted to have the political protest rally, lawful assembly, whatever you want to call it, at this park too. And we still do have fortnightly ones on Saturdays at Surfers Paradise under the Surfers Paradise sign. They are authorised for up to 100 people, and unfortunately, with the protest now not being authorised, that was another key point with the magistrate's decision this time around. The magistrate didn't decide to ban me from protesting anywhere in the universe on a particular day, and actually bothered to follow the law in just not authorising a protest. But the point is, if it's an authorised protest, more people will turn up because they think, hey, look, the police aren't going to fine us, whereas people may well get fined for an unauthorised one, just as an example. And hopefully the police here aren't like the ones in Victoria where let's smash some skulls or whatever. As I keep telling people, I don't know how they pass a psychological training or psychological testing unless that is a requirement of riot police, that hey, look, we need people to follow orders no matter what. Just make sure you don't kill a person, something like that. Yeah, it is a lovely view here. I'm not sure how hot it is. It's quite hot, especially in a suit. but I just came from the court and I wanted to come here and update everyone as to what happened. And then, I've got to put in another application. The police station's just, probably 70 metres from part of this park. And, hopefully then it doesn't have the threshold issue, supposedly, where the magistrate was claiming that the form's not filled in correctly, basically. Even though, case law and the Acts Interpretation Act appear to disagree with the magistrate, as well as other case law. But anyway, I'm going to bugger off now. Anything else interesting? Yeah, so that'll probably do. So in this video, just recovering for those that have just joined. Basically, I covered the difference between positive and negative rights, i.e., human rights. What happened in the court case today, which was again before, it's publicly known as Magistrate Mackenzie in Southport, and how it differed from substantially the same type of hearing, again under the Peaceful Assembly Act, that I had back in May. With that one, it then got appealed to the District Court and then to the Supreme Court. It's before the Supreme Court's Court of Appeal, and that won't be heard, unfortunately, until next year, sometime between 8th of February and March. I'm estimating that it might take 5 days of court, because it's not just an appeal as in, hey, look, the prior judge made stuff up, or this is ineloquently put, but that's basically what you're doing in a lot of appeals. But an appeal de novo, which means hearing the whole thing, so it's not just based on transcripts and there was a slight error that the judge misinterpreted the Acts Interpretation Act, as an example. So, hoping to get expert witnesses, including, potentially doctors or law professors or whatever, about the legality of these COVID directions, about other ancillary things like, are lockdowns effective, as an example. Should the government ban ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine, that kind of thing. One advantage of it being heard next year, though, is that hopefully a lot more information comes to light in that time, even though it's a long time away. But then you have more data to show, hey, look, again, the lockdowns don't work, they don't actually help. That hydroxychloroquine, as an example, that was seen as working, and it was banned in certain places, like in Switzerland, for 2 weeks, and then the COVID deaths 2 weeks later, people dying with it, and it's important to realise it's with COVID, not of COVID, then exploded, and then they unbanned it because it turned out the hydroxychloroquine study was garbage. They mixed up the dosage for hydroxychloroquine with the dosage for a different drug called hydroxyquinoline, and were basically overdosing patients, not giving them zinc as a cofactor, not giving them the antibiotic. The antibiotics cover secondary infections, so you might get a virus and then you get a bacterial lung infection, giving you pneumonia, as an example. And they're also only giving it to people when they're on death's door anyway, and then they use that as proof that hydroxychloroquine doesn't work. But all of a sudden, I imagine you'll find that after Donald Trump's re-elected, or not re-elected, or some other complicated thing, which I suspect is going to be attempted at least, and that is to delay the election and then appoint a different person as a president. I'll do a whole video on that. But then, all of a sudden hydroxychloroquine, it works, because they don't want... And what kind of a bad society do we have where the media and government make decisions based on political not really political considerations, but basically, Trump said use this stuff, so then they ban it because they don't like Trump, when it's helping people and saving lives. And it's banned, and it's not just a political consideration like, imagine a backlash, against doing this action. It's, hey, let's try and stop this person being re-elected. And Barbara says the link she posted discusses this. So anyway, so I'll bugger off now. So this is what the park looks like, including they've got like a cool playground there. Found out yesterday there's another playground down there somewhere that's got like a little train track thing with little like colourful bicycles, if you want to call it that, on the little train track. As in like they're big chunky things, and apparently it used to be in the shape of a train, but they've changed it. So it's a lovely place to come visit if you're on the Gold Coast, and there's a lot of lovely places to visit here, and that'll do me. Cheerio. Hope you're all well and coping with this COVID stuff and whatever else is happening in life. Bye. Please like, share, subscribe, etc. Bye.